Good evening, folks. This is your ticker guy coming at you from wonderful Niceville, Florida. If you're not coming at this from the market ticker site and you're seeing it from YouTube, please use the descriptive link on YouTube to get the actual ticker site. The graphs in their original format are there and make it a little easier for you to follow along and see them. I want to go after this whole GDP thing and the green shoots nonsense that Dennis Neal and all of the other media are spewing. We're going to start with the GDP report itself. Up here on the screen I have the adjustments to the second quarter GDP to bring them in line with the first quarter methodology. We're going to take a couple of things out and we're going to add a few things in. First off, the adjustments that were made to the first quarter GDP, negative 0.9, have to be taken off the second in order to bring us to parity, so we're reporting like from like. Secondly, the government spent 4.3% on an annualized basis less in the first quarter than it had previously. So we must adjust that. But rather than raising, that would normally raise the first quarter GDP, rather than adjust the first quarter GDP, since we're dealing with the second, we will subtract it from the second in order to bring that in line as well. In the second quarter, the government spent 10.9% more. So we're going to subtract off that because that's government interference. And again, we're interested in the real economy, that is the impact on you as a consumer, you as a businessman, not on whether or not the government is showering money on people. And we'll get to the effect of that in a minute. Both of those numbers have to be adjusted to be 30% of the reported value because the government is 30% of the economy. When we do that, we find that the second quarter GDP on an actual basis in fact declined at the same rate as did the first. In fact, since you have to adjust it off on the first quarter GDP for the government spending, it's actually a little bit worse, but not by much. For all intents and purposes, the decline in the economy in the second quarter was identical to that of the first quarter. Those are the facts, folks. Now let's get to a few other things. I had a graph for Dennis Neal's show Friday night. He didn't use it. I wanted him to, but he didn't put it up. That's not a big surprise. This is the year-over-year change in GDP. Notice that the graph still shows the line sloping in the downward direction. Until that starts to slope in the upward direction, the year-over-year change has not gone positive. Many of the pump monkeys and others in the media are trumpeting green shoots based upon the quarter-over-quarter numbers. I've got both of those on one graph, and we'll put that up on the screen here for you. And I want you to pay very careful attention to the time period of 2001, the 73-74 recession, the early 1990s recession, the 80-81 recession. In fact, you can go back and you can look at all the recessions, and you will see that the quarter-over-quarter number is so noisy as to be absolutely meaningless in terms of predicting a turnaround based upon one quarter's results. In many cases, during the middle of an economic downturn and during the middle of a market downturn, we actually had quarter-over-quarter numbers that were positive, but that did not signal the end of the malaise. You cannot use quarter-over-quarter numbers for this purpose, ladies and gentlemen. The proof is right there in front of you in this graph. Nobody will show you this in the mainstream media. The ticker guy will. Now let's get to the next part. This is a credit-led recession. It started with people unable to pay their subprime mortgage and has now turned into generally people being unable to pay, whether it be businesses, consumers, or anything else. This is the reason. Here is the total non-government debt in the system as a percentage of GDP. I've presented this before in the ticker. Now you have it on video as well. But let's break this down because it's a whole lot worse than it appears. Here is the consumer credit numbers. Going all the way back to 1940, hey, isn't this great? We're going to have advertisers and the government tell you to go out there and buy something. Don't you remember George W. Bush after the 9/11 attacks? Go out and shop. Well, gee, oh boy, people did indeed go out and shop. This is the total amount of debt outstanding, not what has been paid off. This is what's outstanding against consumers in the United States. Notice that at the very end of this chart there's a nasty little hook downward. Also notice that it's the first time it's happened since the Depression. We'll zoom in on this a little bit. Here we go with a little bit closer time series, just counting the recent years from the 1980s forward. Notice that while we have had a nasty little hook downward, we're nowhere near what I believe to be an equilibrium level. Do you really think that $50 billion coming off of consumer credit balances is enough to restore the economy to balance? Out of over $2 trillion? I don't. If you do, then hey, it's green shoots. That's fantastic, right? Well, except for one small problem. See, that small amount of decline in credit outstanding represents the defaults and write-downs taken in the consumer credit space, the debt that has been cleared off the books. The rest is still out there. Where is it? Well, you know, gee, the banks supposedly haven't got it all. We don't have it all. We got all these foreclosures. We got all these bankruptcies. What's going on here? Where'd it go? Oh, there it is. Gee, I was wondering where it was going to show up. So all we did was shovel all of this debt, take it from the private sector, and we've shoveled it into the federal government. Hey, the taxpayers got it. Well, that chart looks really nasty, doesn't it? In fact, it looks kind of parabolic. But you know, it's even worse than it appears. Here it is restated from the Treasury Department in annualized rate of change. Does anyone think that this can be sustained? Does anyone think that China is going to give us an unlimited credit card? How about Japan? How about Saudi Arabia and all their oil? Well, you know, that is what you're believing, folks. That's what you're buying into if you buy into green shoots. And oh, by the way, here's another little tidbit of interesting trivia for you. This is off chart of the day. I have shamelessly borrowed it. And it shows the change in S&P profits. Yeah. What was that about the stock market being at 1,000 and the Dow over 9,000? You know, the S&P is around 1,000 right now. But where'd the profits go? See, revenues are dropping rapidly. Profits are being maintained simply on the basis of cutting employees. But when you cut employees and you get rid of inventory, that's a one-time thing, right? What happens going forward? Well, this chart seems to think that maybe that ain't so great. So anyway, here's the bottom line, folks. You got to look at all the facts. And when you look at all the facts, what I want to understand, what I can't get through my head, is how, with all of this debt load in the system that we haven't gotten rid of, consumer, government, across the board, how are we going to manage to restart credit creation when that's the reason we're here in the first place, that we hit the wall? All we've done is transfer it to Uncle Sam and bet that his credit card isn't going to come up declined. That'll work for a little while, maybe. But how much longer can it continue? That's really the question, isn't it? I'm your ticker guy, and that's my opinion.